Okay, tonight's shiur is sponsored by Guy Mordechai for the Refuah Shalema of Yona Bat Osnat. Also sponsored anonymously in honor of the happiness, health, and wealth of Daniel Shalom ben Sarah. And for the Refuah Shalema of Menachem Mendel ben Sarah Batya and Devorah Fega Bat Rezel. Hi. I think we're good. Thank you. Okay, so Mishenichnas Adar Marbim Besimcha. That is what the Chachamim tell us. And therefore, we're going to speak a little bit about the topic of Simcha, how to achieve it, more exactly what the definition of Simcha is, and to understand how it relates to the month of Adar. Okay. So, the world at large, especially here in America, we believe in the pursuit of happiness. That's an American concept, an American theme. It's part of what we believe in. And the question is, what is happiness? And how do we achieve happiness? And how does happiness connect to the month of Adar, such that we say that when Adar starts, we have to increase happiness? What does happiness have to do with Adar? We all like to be happy, but what is real happiness? So the first thing we're going to do is understand what happiness is not. That's the first thing we have to do, because there is a common misconception in the world. What is that common misconception? Most people in the world, well, if anybody wants to comment or ask or say or suggest anything, just cut right in and do it. Okay? Please. Most people in the world think that happiness is something that it's not. Most people confuse happiness with pleasure. Pleasure. Having a good time, enjoying themselves. Most people in the entire planet confuse happiness with pleasure. And they think, no, thank you. Thank you. Most people think that if they have pleasure, they will be happy. That is the number one mistake that most earthlings have. And that is why most people throughout their life will spend their entire life trying to have more and more and more pleasure, more and more enjoyment, because they mistakenly think that pleasure will bring them happiness. It is totally wrong. Pleasure can never, ever, never bring a person happiness. Pleasure is enjoyable. We like it. It's pleasurable. That's the word, pleasure, right? But it will never make a person happy. What's the proof? I mean, there's many proofs. But the simple proof is, let's take a person who thinks that a certain pleasure, a certain enjoyment will make him happy. So he goes to the restaurant and he orders his favorite food. Because he'll be happy. If he has his favorite thing, if he gets what he wants, he'll be happy. So he orders his favorite food. And they bring it to him. But it's not exactly the way he likes it. But it's his favorite food. It's not exactly the way he likes it. How happy is he at that moment? So he tells himself, well, I'm going to be happy soon. When they make it the right way, I'll be happy then. Okay? So he sends it back. They bring it back to him. It's almost exactly the way he likes it. So he eats it. And for a few minutes, he has a good time. He has pleasure. He does. And then, afterwards, he had such a good time that he orders another one. Another one. And he orders another one, a third one, a fourth one, a fifth one. By the time he's done with the seventh one, how happy do you think he is? He had 7 steaks. How happy do you think he is? And then when he goes home, he spends the evening saying Asher Yatzar, how happy do you think he is? And then the next morning, when he's so sick to his stomach, how happy? What do you mean? But pleasure gives happiness, doesn't it? I had not 1, not 2, not 3, I had 7 pleasures. Should be happy. I should be 7 times happier now than I was last night. But I'm not. I'm miserable. I can't even go to work or to school because I have such stomach pains. I'm miserable. So, that's a simple proof that pleasure does not give happiness. Right? Take another fellow, another person, who they're going to buy the car that they had their eye on for a really long time. They found a good deal. It's their favorite. They're so excited. They get it. They should be happy, right? Should be happy. Now he should be happy. But he's not. Because he gets a phone call. He finds out that his closest friend or relative passed away. So he's not happy. But he just got his favorite car. Pleasure should make him happy. The answer, of course, is, as we've said 3-4 times now, pleasure does not make a person happy. It's a misconception, it's a mistake, it's absolute nonsense. Pleasure can never make a person happy. You'll enjoy it, for sure. No one's going to dispute that. If anybody disputes that, they're wrong. You will enjoy it. Enjoyable things are enjoyable. Pleasure is pleasurable. But it doesn't make happiness. Now, why, before we define what happiness is, why does most of the world have this mistake? Why does most of the world carry on with this mistake their entire life? What's going on over here? What's the problem that most people think so, and they think so their whole life? Why? So the answer is, think about the average person. Average person. Average person has an average amount of money at their fingertips, and therefore they can buy for themselves, they can reach for themselves an average amount of pleasure. So the misconception that having a good time, pleasure, will make me happy, that misconception is short-lived. What do I mean? They can only get their hands on so many pleasures because they're average, they only have that much money. So that allows them to continue thinking, you know why I'm not yet happy? Because I don't have enough pleasure. I only have X amount that I can afford. If I had more money, I would have more pleasure. And then I would be happy. So the average person spends the next period of his life trying to get more money so that he could buy more pleasure, so that he could then be happy. And he may even achieve that. He may even make more money and buy more pleasure, but he's still not happy. But that's fine, because he can continue living with his lie, with his confusion, because he tells himself, that's only because I still don't have enough money to buy enough pleasure. I only have twice as much as I used to have. I don't have 3 or 4 or 10 times as much. I don't have the private jet, and I don't have 12 apartments and homes all over the world, and I don't have this, that, and the other, so I'm not yet happy. I'll get there. When I get all those things, all those pleasures, I'll then be happy. And the average person never gets enough money, never gets his hands on all those things to have seen that he was wrong, to have proven to himself that it's not true, that pleasure won't make you happy. He doesn't get there because he doesn't get a hold of enough pleasures to prove that to himself definitively. So therefore he lives his entire life, till the very end, believing that the reason he's not yet happy is because he did not yet have the full amount of pleasure that he was hoping to get. And had he got it, he would have been happy. And he finishes his career, 120, it's over, life is ending, and he finishes thinking, if only I would have had a little more pleasure, I would have been happy. A little more fun, I would have been happy. That's a misconception. Most people live their entire lives that way because of the reality that they can't afford all the fun and all the pleasures in the world, so therefore they don't yet prove to themselves that that won't make them happy. Okay. But, and here is the big exception to the rule. There are people in the world, the rich and famous rock stars and movie stars and multi-billionaire company owners, that they actually do have all the money they could ever want. They have it. And therefore they can buy for themselves every single pleasure that they can just come up with. They can buy it all. They can. And what happens to them? So, I grew up in the 90s. I was a teenager in the early 90s. And without naming any names, maybe we will drop some names, one after the other, all the rock stars from when I was a teenager are dropping like flies. In their 20s, and in their 30s, and in their 40s, and in their 50s, committing suicide. Many, 5 or 10 that I could just think of off the top of my head. Why? What is it? The answer is very simple. Like we said before, the average person thinks he'll be happy if one day he gets enough pleasure. But these guys, they have all the pleasure. They have so much pleasure, they don't know what to do with it. They have too much pleasure. And they see, I'm still not happy. I have every car I ever wanted, every spouse I ever wanted, every house, every gadget, every trip, every vacation, every thrill, everything. I have everything. I have my own amusement park in my backyard, right? I have everything. I don't have to wait in line for the ride. It's my ride. I own it. It's in my backyard. I have everything. I have everything. And I'm still not happy. Then the light bulb turns on and he realizes, whoa, I have all those things that everybody thinks will eventually make them happy. I have it all. And I'm still not happy. I'm never going to be happy. Nothing can make me happy. I have this, it didn't make me happy. I have that, it didn't make me happy. I have every single thing and it didn't make me happy. So I give up. I'm never going to be happy. And he puts an end to his life because he sees there's no happiness. Happiness is a false, fake, doesn't exist, game over. Who needs it? And they put an end to their life. The average person never does that, never thinks of doing that, because why should I do that? A little more pleasure, I'll be happy. I'll get there. He won't, but he thinks he'll get there, right? But they have it all, and they see they're not happy, so they put an end to it because they see they'll never come to it, it'll never happen. As a matter of fact, something very interesting which I heard from my rabbi in Yerushalayim, who heard it from his rabbi, who passed away 5 years ago, a big tzaddik, who heard it from his rabbi, who was the head rabbi of a yeshiva called the Mir Yeshiva, that traveled from Europe through Shanghai, just barely escaping out of the Holocaust, and landed in New York. Great tzaddik named Rav Yechezkel Levenstein. He one time taught his students the following. If you go, now he never went to such a thing, so I don't know how he knew this, but he found out. If you go to the funeral of a famous Hollywood star, go to the funeral. Now the Hollywood star, his entire life, is the highest end physicality, physical pleasures that any of us can imagine. That's their whole life is like that. From start to finish, their whole life is like that. Go to his funeral. What do they say about him at his funeral? They don't discuss how handsome he was, at least not in the microphone, in the public speeches. They don't discuss how much money he had, how many cars he had, how many spouses he's been through. They don't discuss any of that. What do they speak about in the public eulogies of these Hollywood rock stars? He was so good to his elderly mother. He gave so much charity. He was so kind. He helped little old ladies cross the street. He did this and he did that. They don't say anything about his physical, pleasurable life. They only talk about the altruistic, beautiful, meaningful things that he did. Why? Because at a moment of truth, just for a moment, even they recognize that what really matters is not the cars and the money and the jets and the vacations and the amusement parks in the backyard. None of that. Not the fame and not the fortune. They know that doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't really get them anywhere. At the moment of truth, it comes out. Just when the moment of truth is over, the funeral's over, they're bombarded with all of the physicality again, which overruns their psyche, and therefore they slip back into it. But for a moment, even they are able to admit it. Unbelievable. Now, if take all of that we just said, pleasure will never give a person happiness, then what, in fact, is the true definition of happiness? What is the true definition of happiness? And before we define it, I just want to give one example, and then we'll actually speak out the definition. An example it's an extreme example, but it hits the ball home. In the concentration camps, in the gas chambers, right before the gas chambers, holy Jews, not everybody, obviously, you have to be on a certain level for this, but many holy Jews were rejoicing, celebrating the fact that they are going to be killed. Not that they want to die, but that they're going to be killed because they're Jewish, and they're going to sacrifice their lives for the sake of God. That the Gentile, Yamach Shemo, is going to kill him because he's Jewish. He's going to die sanctifying God's name, celebrating, dancing. And the Gentiles were watching this. They're going out of their mind. They thought maybe he's crazy. He realizes we're about to kill him. He's gone nuts. Because he's dancing and singing, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and he has a smile on his face. He must be crazy. He must be out of his mind. But we know that's not the pshat. That's not what happened over there. What happened over there is that these Jews realized that they have something so valuable that no one can ever take away from them. It's a value that can never disappear. It'll never go away. They have something that'll last forever and ever and ever, and no one can take it. And that made them celebrate. Because the definition, and here we are, the definition of happiness is knowing that I have something of absolute value that will last forever and can never go away. You eat a steak, you enjoy it for that moment, but the pleasure goes away. And if you eat too much of it, you'll feel it negatively, right? The pleasure only lasts momentarily. When you know that you have something, you have achieved something, you've gained something that will never go away, it's something that is absolute value. Absolute. And it will never go away, and it can never be taken from you. You'll never lose it. That brings a person happiness. So these holy Jews in the concentration camps had reason to be happy, because to die because you're a Jew is such a big mitzvah that it's something that is of absolute value. It's priceless, and no one can take it away from you. You'll never lose it if you have it. And that's the reason to be happy. That's an extreme case. But bring it back to earth, back to our not so extreme life. Anytime we have a mitzvah, any little bit of ruchnius, of spiritual life, something spiritual that we do, a mitzvah for God, some way that we're connecting to God by doing a mitzvah of the Torah, that is of absolute value. That's something that no one can ever take away from me, ever. And it'll last forever, and it's of a value that is priceless. That gives a person happiness, because I know I have something that's never going to go away. It's going to be there forever for me. It's going to stand there for me forever, and it can never go away, can never be taken. And it's the most valuable thing. That gives a person happiness. Now, to reach that, you have to first actually appreciate that spiritual things are of absolute value. If you don't know, if you don't recognize, if you don't realize that a mitzvah, Torah study, fulfilling the mitzvahs of the Torah, connecting to God, if you don't appreciate that that is of absolute value, then you won't appreciate it. Then you won't be happy from it, because you don't know, right? Just like a person, if I hand you a $100 bill, but it's wrapped in newspaper, and it looks like it's garbage, and I hand it to you, say, here, you hold this. I don't want to hold it. Why do you say I don't want to hold it? Because you don't know. You don't know what it's worth. You don't know that there's a $100 bill inside. Or if I give you a really, really crummy looking suitcase, old, dirty, filthy suitcase, I say, can you take this? I want to give it to you. I want you to have this. Now, it's full of $100 bills, but I don't tell you that. It's full. The thing is busting with $100 bills. Okay? But I don't tell you that. And it's this old, dirty, like one wheel is broken, so it's like, limping suitcase. And I say, here, I want you to have this. You don't want it. Why don't you want it? Because you don't know. You don't recognize the value. So that's number one. Step number one is, for us to be happy, we have to recognize what is it, what items, what things in the world have absolute value, are priceless, they have the most value. What things are they? If once you know that that suitcase contains many $100 bills, you'll take it gladly. Without that wheel, so it's limping, you'll pull it, you'll carry the thing home. You won't care, right? Once you know. So the first thing is for us to know, we have to know that there's nothing more valuable in the universe than spiritual value. There's nothing more valuable than spiritual value. We've already proven that physical pleasure won't get you anywhere, won't give you happiness. Spiritual value is of absolute value. It is the highest currency, that's first of all. And second of all, it can never go away. Once you have it in your bank account, it's there for good. You cannot lose it. You can do, chas v'shalom, heaven forbid, a person could do bad things that will unbalance the scale. But the good things that you've done, They're of absolute value. No one can take those away from you. And absolute value means forever. So that's the first thing to know, to realize that spiritual mitzvot, Torah, that is of absolute value. It's something that'll last forever. It's priceless. No one could put a number on it, and you have it forever. That's number one. Once you know that, and you pursue spiritual things far more than you pursue physical things, the set of priorities you have will suddenly change, because you realize the value of every single spiritual thing. I had a Rabbi who, I never met him, but I learned a lot of his teachings. He passed away about 20 years ago, maybe. His name, many people have heard of him, many people read his writings. Rav Shimshon Pinkus. You may have heard of him. So, one time, I heard this from a person who actually met him and heard this from him himself, directly. One time, he was in the airport waiting for a connecting flight. And he understood, based on the clock, based on the information he was given, he understood that he had a certain amount of time till the next flight. So he decided, now's the time that I'll daven, I'll pray now while we're waiting. I have enough time, I won't be rushed, I'll be able to pray properly. And while he was praying, they announced that boarding is going to take place earlier than they expected, and the flight is going to take off earlier than they expected. And everyone should begin boarding. He was in the middle of praying. And he was trying to keep his concentration and not to rush through it. But at some point, the last little section of his prayer, he got too nervous. He was going to miss the connecting flight, and he rushed it. He didn't skip it, God forbid. But he rushed through it. And he said that for the rest of his life, he regretted doing that. Because when I'm praying to God, when I'm davening Shmoneh Esrei, where else do I need to be? I'm talking to God. I'm with God at that moment. I'm experiencing and doing a mitzvah. I'm doing the most spiritual thing I could possibly do. Where else do I need to be? If I miss the flight, it's no fun. It's not great. It costs me money, hassle. But what could be better than praying, than experiencing Shmoneh Esrei in the truest, most amazing, deepest way? That's the way he prayed. He was tremendous. He had tremendous concentration in his prayer. I can't even describe it. I don't even get it. And he said for the rest of his life he regretted that, because you're talking about a value, of absolute value. A mitzvah has eternal value forever. It's priceless. It's worth more than anything else. And so he regretted for the rest of his life having rushed through those little few lines of the prayer or paragraph of the prayer just so he could catch a flight, which, by the way, did not end up taking off early, of course. But anyway, so once we recognize and appreciate that the value of spiritual things is way beyond anything else, then we will experience happiness when we actually achieve spiritual achievements. That will bring us happiness, because we will know that we have something of the greatest value that can never be taken away from us. Something of truest absolute value. Any questions so far?
How do we know it's of truest absolute value? Once we achieve the happiness, how do we know it's the happiness?
So just think about it in your own life. Again, the example of the $100 bills. If I hand you that suitcase, as funny and as dirty and as crummy as it looks, I hand it to you and I whisper into your ear that it's full of $100 bills, and you know I'm not joking. You know I'm a serious person, I mean it. So how are you going to be happy a little bit? Yeah. You will, right? Because you have something very valuable. So you're going to be thrilled. Imagine if you had that times 10, or times 100, or 1,000. A mitzvah is worth 1,000,000 times more than that suitcase full of $100 bills. 1,000,000,000 times more. Infinite. So if I know that I have something that's worth infinite, one mitzvah is infinite. if I know I have something of infinite, absolute value, if I'll be happy just with a suitcase of $100, I'll be happy with a suitcase of $100 bills. Won't I be happy with infinite? But I have to appreciate and recognize and know and believe that it has that value. That's why we have to, that's step number one, is recognizing that. Once I recognize that, then I will, every time I pursue and achieve a mitzvah, I'll be happy because I'll know that I have something of value, of absolute forever value. Now I want to just explain how that connects to the month of Adar, and why the sages tell us, Mishenichnas Adar Marbim Besimcha, that when the month of Adar starts, we increase happiness. Why is Purim a day of happiness? The Megillah tells us that on Purim there was Simcha v'sason laYehudim, extreme happiness for the Jewish people. Why? What was the happiness? That they had a death threat, they were going to be killed, and then they were saved, so they were happy? Of course. But it goes so much deeper than that. The Chachamim tell us, the Gemara says, that when the Jewish nation was in the desert for 40 years, after we left Egypt, led by Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu brought us to Mount Sinai, and God gave us the Torah. And the Torah tells us that the way that took place, the description the Torah says is that the Jewish people were standing betachtit hahar. We were standing under the mountain. And the Talmud asks, under the mountain? What do you mean we're standing under a mountain? We were standing at the edge of the mountain, but it says under the mountain. So the Gemara says, the sages tell us, that in fact, God lifted up that mountain over us and said to us, if you will accept my Torah, we will have a great day. If you do not accept my Torah, goodbye. I'll drop the mountain on you, and that'll be the end. So the Gemara says that's kind of rough. That's kind of we felt kind of forced into it a lot bit, right? I mean, if you tell me you're going to drop a mountain on my head, unless I say yes to something, I'm going to say yes, because I don't want that mountain dropped on my head. So we said yes, but we were kind of forced into it. Now, there's many different explanations in the commentaries, but that's the basic understanding. Then the Gemara says some very amazing point, that many years later, in the time of Esther and Mordechai, after the miracle of salvation happened, and we were saved from the terrible death threat that we had, we, as a nation, recommitted the commitment we said yes to at Mount Sinai. We recommitted to it. But this time, we did it positively out of love. No forcefulness. It was out of love. We were so thankful and so appreciative for the miracle, for God saving our people, that we recommitted and reaccepted the Torah out of love. What does that mean? So the commentaries explain what that means is that we understood how valuable our relationship with God can be, how valuable the Torah and the mitzvot, the commandments of the Torah, can be. We realized God saved us. He saved us because He loves us and He wants us to have a good life of spirituality. And we realized how valuable that could be, and therefore we recommitted ourselves to it. We recommitted ourselves to it. Why? Because we realized the great value that there was in it. What caused, I'm working a little bit backwards here, bear with me. What caused the death threat, Haman's decree that all the Jews will be killed? What caused that? You know, no Gentile, no enemy can threaten us or decree anything on us if God doesn't want it to happen. So what caused it? Why was it that God allowed him to make that threat so that we were all under a death threat? Why? And the answer is, we as a nation had sinned. There's two different opinions in the Talmud what the sin was. Two different sins. Whatever. Doesn't matter right now what they were. But the point was we had sinned. We had left the mitzvot of the Torah. We had abandoned certain mitzvot of the Torah. We had sinned. And now, after the miracle of salvation, what brought about the salvation? That we did teshuvah, we did repentance, tshuva. We came back and recommitted ourselves. Why did we recommit ourselves? Because we recognized, we were awakened to the great, absolute, eternal value that the Torah and the mitzvot have. That recognition, like we said before, when I recognize that something spiritual is of absolute value, I'm happy if I have it, because I have something of absolute value. So why is Purim such a celebration? Because we recommitted ourselves to the Torah and mitzvot, which means we recommitted and reconnected ourselves to everything that has absolute value. The Torah and the mitzvot have absolute value, forever, eternal. We recommitted and reconnected ourselves to that. We now have that. We're once again part of that. It's once again part of us. That's why there's such a celebration on Purim. Purim is a day where we reconnected to the Torah, re-accepted the Torah, and recommitted to the Torah. And that's a celebration, because if I have the Torah, if I have mitzvot, it means I have things of eternal value, of absolute value. Of course I'm going to be happy. That's the happiness of Purim. And that's why Nichnas Adar Marbim Besimcha, because we're approaching that celebration, where we celebrate the fact that we love God and He loves us so much, because of our reconnecting to Him and to the Torah and the mitzvot. Any questions? Think while I have a little drink here. Think while I drink. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'hakol niyeh b'dvaro.
What sin could be so bad that we had to get the death penalty?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. What sin could be so bad that we had a death threat for the entire nation? What sin could be so bad? That's a good question. So the two sins that are spoken about are the sin of bowing down to the idol that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. Bowing down to an idol. Think about it for a minute. What does bowing down to an idol, because I'm being pressured by a king, I'm being threatened, pressured by a king, what does that show? That shows, after all, God commanded us never to bow down to an idol. If I, because of my fear of this human being king, he's a human, Nebuchadnezzar was human. If because of my fear of him, I'm willing to bow down to an idol when God commanded me not to, that means that my fear of him, of this human, is greater than my fear of God. My appreciation of what it means to violate the word of that human is worse than what it means to violate the word of God. That means I'm placing this human being before God. That was the sin, according to one opinion of the sages. And the other sin is a little bit harder to understand. The other opinion, Achashverosh, the king at the time, made a party, and he invited the Jewish people to join the party. And the sages tell us that Mordechai realized, Mordechai was brilliant. Mordechai was a leader of the Jewish people. He realized that this is sinister. This is a trick. He's inviting us to the party because he wants to cause us to fail. Why? Haman studied Jewish history. Haman knew the secret. What's the secret? We mentioned before that nobody can harm the Jewish people unless we sin and we deserve it, and God decides that we deserve to be harmed. So Haman and Achashverosh sat down and had a meeting and said, how are we going to get these Jews? And Haman said to the king, we can't get them unless they sin and they deserve a punishment. So the king said, all right, so then I guess there's nothing we could do because they're not sinning these days. So Haman said, no, make a party. Invite the Jews to the party. Glatt kosher. They have no excuse not to come. At the party, have inappropriate male and female interactions going on, and then they sin. Once they sin, They deserve a punishment. Then we'll be able to get them. So when this party was about to happen, the invitations went out, and all the publicizing for the party, all the hype, all the excitement was taking place. And Mordechai hears about it, and he recognizes the slyness, the trickery, the negative motivation behind it. And he commanded the Jews, I'm telling you, don't go to that party. It's bad news. And they ignored him. Not all the Jews ignored him. 18,500 Jews ignored him and went to the party. Not all the Jews. Not even most of the Jews. But enough Jews ignored the greatest rabbi, the greatest leader of that generation, that it was considered such a terrible sin that allowed a decree of destruction. It's hard to understand because 18,500 is a small amount compared to the whole nation. So it's a little bit hard to understand, but that's the idea. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
It does.
Thanks.
Okay. Anything else?
Was it the decree of Mordechai or was it the decree of God?
Which
for the second stage?
Was the decree?
When I'm saying like when Mordechai said don't go to that party because like obviously something's going to go on. Was it because Hashem told him or was it because
I don't think Hashem told him. He had the Torah wisdom to know that these Rishaim, these wicked people, are up to no good, and they definitely are not trying to help us. And he knew what they're up to. He had the Torah wisdom to recognize that. Okay.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mishinach Nisad Marbim Besimcha. So Rabbi's saying that because we basically re-accepted the Torah again during that time of Purim, so that's why the Simcha is greater. But is the Simcha of Purim and Adar, is it greater than other times? For example, let's say Shavuos when we receive the Torah.
So that's what I was saying before, that the Gemara is telling us that on Shavuos when we received the Torah, it was with some level of duress.
Right.
It was not completely out of love. So we were pressured, forced into it, threatened into it. It doesn't have the same excitement. This has a full excitement. We didn't, in other words, when we said yes the first time, it's not because we appreciated the value. It's because we were threatened somewhat. The second time was because we appreciated the truth and the value behind it. We appreciated that if God gives it to us, it can only be the best thing that there is.